This session will be recorded, and I will post all the information on the past data architecture virtual chapter under 2017 archives. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today, and if you have any questions, feel free to email me at rob@sqltigers.com. And I'd like to thank Ben for coming on today and giving this session. Let's see, go to the next slide. We have a lot of great upcoming meetings. I've sent the link in the emails. So feel free to sign up and when they come up, and please log in. So I'd like to thank our sponsor, Nutanix. They've been sponsoring us for a year now, and they're going to do it another year. So please click on the link and check out their website. They have a lot of great solutions for you. You know, they make this possible for everyone. So thank you, Nutanix. Upcoming, they're going to have Past Summit again this year. And if you want to save a little money, please use this code. It's the VC15FFM6. You save $150 off your registration. So we get, if we get enough people to use it, we can give away a session. That's what we did, I think, 2 years ago, and last year we didn't, but maybe we can do it this year. So if you're going, please use the code. We can then, you know, if enough people use it, we'll be able to, you know, give out a session. So with that, I'm ready to start everything up. I'll turn it over to Ben and Mike.
Thanks a lot, Rob. So this is Mike McGee. I'm a senior systems engineer with Nutanix, and I really appreciate everyone joining us today. We're real lucky to have Ben Metcalf with us. So Ben, you know, rather than I give an introduction, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role with Faith Technologies?
I've been with Faith almost 2 years now. I came in as a systems administrator. I've worked in IT for a little over a decade now, done everything from Linux to Windows, SQL, Exchange, pretty much anything under the sun. Several Microsoft certifications, certified as a Microsoft trainer, and a lot of the things that basically anything I can get away from a computer is anything that I'm going to do when I'm not at work, whether it be working outside, whether it be working on vehicles. A lot of time in the industry, a lot of time in front of the computer, so just try to get away from the computer as much as humanly possible.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. A lot of stick time, you know, when you do have some downtime, it's always great to get around and move around, not be so sedentary as we can get from time to time. So can you give us some background on Faith Technologies? You know, what you guys do?
Faith Technologies is an electrical contracting company. We usually come in to do all the wiring, and we have things like BIMs where we can turn around and basically lay out the whole building using VR technology. Then we can lay in everything over the top of it, give it a nice standard. With IT, everything that we touch, everything that we keep running, helps the business to progress farther because they house our data. We're at about 2,500 employees right now, and we have 28 branch offices around the U.S. So our job is to basically unite them and have one spot where everybody can get their information, store their information, and a lot of that is in our databases. They pull information on a regular basis, whether it's our CAD designers, our purchasing agents, our estimators, our HR. All of it's located into different databases that they're accessing regularly.
No, that's a great background. So you know, just some questions that came to mind based on that. So it sounds like you'd have people accessing, centralized databases perhaps locally within an office, or maybe possibly in the field while, scoping projects and doing that kind of work. Is that an accurate description?
Yep, we have one data center that literally is our hub of everything. Our offices, whether they're a four-man branch office, or in this case, the office that I work in, we have about 100 employees in. It doesn't matter. They're all treated as branch offices. Our home office is treated as our data center. So everything flows through the data center, which is where we actually have all of our Nutanix equipment.
No, that's a great background. So, so my understanding is you came to Faith Technology. You said 2 years ago, and it sounds like there was a major migration project already underway, and it had to do with hyperconverged infrastructure, and in this case, Nutanix. What kind of background did you have going into this? Like, did you have background on hyperconverged infrastructure or Nutanix specifically, or how did it look to you moving into that into that scenario?
I actually had no idea what Hyperconverged was coming in, and I went to the interview, and they were talking about Hyperconverged and this stuff named Nutanix. So the first thing I did was go home, look it up, pull down community editions, start playing around with it, looking at it, because it was something new that I had never been able to actually work with. And I kind of got the baptism by fire, but on the same token, it was very well, the project itself was very well laid out. We were upgrading from Cisco UCS. Our data center was old. We were on leases. So every so often we do, everything is every 3 years, we have a lease renewals. So in 3 years, we'll be upgrading our data center equipment, but because of the Nutanix, we won't be upgrading the platform per se, just the hardware.
Gotcha, understood. So were you, so for that existing UCS environment, was that what you might consider a multi-tiered environment with a storage area network and a centralized storage array?
Yep, we had 2 SANs connected to it, along with the 2 servers feeding the SANs. And every VM that we housed was housed within that SAN. We actually went from a rack and a half at our data center to just over half a rack once we actually migrated off of everything. So our footprint became much smaller, as well as the space it took everything up. And we gained double the storage. So through the whole process, they basically sized everything to what we thought we would need. And because of some of the other things that we've used in the background, it's actually caused us to save even more space and more resources so that we can actually allocate more to what we need to allocate more to.
Well, that's a great result. So if we take a step back and consider that existing architecture, the amount of rack space that was taking up, and what you ended up when you moved to HCI with Nutanix, what if you were describing it to someone new, considering you went through that baptism by fire, how would you describe the difference architecturally from that existing SAN-like infrastructure to something with HCI?
I can only speak for the Nutanix platform because that's all I've really worked with. But as far as the hyperconverged infrastructure, it was very, very simple. Much easier than anything that I've ever worked with. It took me longer to trace cords and dismantle the old UCS environment than it did to get the Nutanix environment up and running. And that includes unboxing the servers, racking them, creating all the environment for it to be ready to go.
No, and that is one of the primary benefits of hyperconverged. For the folks that might not know the term, when we talk about HCI or HCI-like technologies, it's really the combination of what might otherwise have been disparate parts. So taking storage outside of a centralized storage array, moving it back into the servers, and then using software to help define a logical, in the case of Nutanix, distributed storage fabric across all those nodes. So really taking the best of centralized storage, but allowing you to use the internal storage of each of the servers within a given architecture. So it's a very common platform to have, something within a given chassis. We like to call it a block, and that block could have some number of nodes within it. It could be 1 node, 2 node, 4 nodes, etc. So it's very easy to take a larger number of servers that might be taking up more storage space or more rack space, the switches associated with them, the storage area network, as well as the underlying storage array, and actually remove the need to have the storage array itself as well as the SAN, reducing that space. But then also the architecture of multiple nodes within a block can also help to reduce space as well. So it's not uncommon to have the kind of benefits that Faith have seen of moving from a single rack per se, or a rack and a half, or even or more, down to half a rack or even less. So you can imagine the benefits when it comes to power savings, cooling, rack space, especially if you're renting a data center or something along those lines. A favorite story that I heard recently was one of our customers reduced from 6 racks down to half a rack, and they actually got a call from their leasing company saying that they needed to power those other racks back on because the coolers were cooling too much, and the roof of the building was actually freezing. So they reduced their heat dissipation by so much. They needed to temporary power on the old equipment just to heat the building to let the coolers do their job until they could readjust the system to handle such a drastic reduction in heat output. So I don't know if you can quantify that, but if you guys have seen similar benefits with respect to power usage, cooling, and things along those lines.
Power usage and cooling, not just that, but the cable organization, the flow of the air through the cabinets, there's less in there, and it's easier to organize. So therefore, the airflow is so much better. So yeah, you do get much more heat dissipation as far as that goes. And when we had to add a host, it was less than an hour to add the host, a full host. And adding drives, anybody that has worked with any kind of storage knows that when you add drives, it can be a cumbersome process depending on which technology you use or which interface you use. We went down and added drives to our hosts, and our data center is about 5 minutes away from the conference room that we were set up in. We went and plugged in the drives. By the time we made it back to the conference room, that storage was already showing up and being used in Nutanix. So within 5 minutes of us plugging in the drives, they were already up and running. No questions, no additional configuration, no nothing.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into some of the other benefits. So as a level set, just to understand, so you guys were already virtualized in your existing environment?
We were about 90% virtualized. We're still about 95% virtualized. We still use some other existing technologies that aren't virtualized, like Commvault has its own system, its own setup, and we have a couple other programs like that have their own pieces and their own setups, but for the most part, we're almost 100% virtualized.
And is that hypervisor ESX?
Yes, hypervisor ESX. Anything from, we have some 5.0 now all the way up to 6 or 5.5, not 6 yet.
Okay, great. So speaking to some of the benefits in that front, because really when you look at hyperconvergence, it's not only a change in the hardware design per se, but it's also inclusive of virtualization as well. And there's obviously multiple virtualization options that you have out there, but it speaks to the ability to virtualize your applications and run them on this consolidated platform. Because it's consolidated, a lot of the benefits not only include the hardware benefits like we just talked about, but also the ease of kind of second-day administrative actions, like like Ben was just saying, around adding drives, around adding additional nodes within an additional cluster, and being able to do so incrementally and very easily. It also helps with because it's a consolidated platform in performing things like upgrades, for example, and keeping that experience as simple as possible across the storage architecture, across the hypervisor, across maybe firmware and other pieces of that environment. So, looking at it holistically across all those items, how has, I know you joined Faith when we were going through that migration process, but compared to other environments that you worked in, how has a day-to-day in life changed by moving to this style of architecture?
Well, first thing, the gentleman that I work with has less years experience than I do in IT. And as anybody knows in IT, trying to show somebody something as a complex process can sometimes be difficult. It took me about 15 minutes to teach him the basics of Nutanix, so he can troubleshoot, do whatever he needs to on his own, which is almost unheard of in our industry. And we actually went through an upgrade here about a month and a half ago, where we upgraded our entire environment, and we upgraded all of our software packages through the Nutanix hypervisor. And it was one of the smoothest processes. We had a couple hiccups along the way, and we're looking into some of the things, but it was more of a sit on your hands and watch. It was all an automated process. It moved everything on its own, and we actually had like a movie up in the background just because we were sitting there and watching it move, VM to VM, host to host, CVM to CVM. And once we had all that done, we were able to enable full dedupe. And because of the full dedupe, we have so far gained 12 terabytes of space back that we previously didn't have. And we use several different things now. We use data protection groups. We use those for storage of the VM snapshots for things like troubleshooting, emergencies. We do monthly restores now with them just to test everything out. But if we have a server go sideways and we can't get back into it, we use Commvault to back up the actual data. But Nutanix does a lot of the snapshot backups. So in that aspect, we can turn around and fire up the old copy of the VM, because in any order that you fire up the snapshots, it doesn't matter. It's not like the ESX product where if you take a snapshot and you try to fire it up out of order, that it actually can cause the other snapshots to go away. This is completely autonomous. So I can take 3 separate snapshots, look at 3 different system states, and go back and say, okay, this changed here, but it wasn't changed here. And it allows us to get a little more in-depth in the troubleshooting. And because of the way that it spins up, it does it so quickly that it allows us less time in the troubleshooting and repair realm, and more time to then be proactive and say, okay, this is what happened, this is how we need to prevent it. And our performance has just been amazing. We have some applications that take a little bit of time to run reports. Some users would experience 2-3 minute times on some of the reports, just because the amount of queries that they do. And once we put in Nutanix, we let it sit for a while. And the Nutanix migration of SQL took less than a week. It was about 3 or 4 days. Our whole environment was migrated in approximately 35 days. But that was migrating 197 VMs. So our SQL environment was about 16 of those. Once they were migrated over, we kind of let things sit for a while, and then we started checking back with some users, asking them how things were going for them. And they're like, oh, this is so much greater. I don't know what you guys did, but they were happy. They were getting 10 to 20 seconds back off these reports. And when they're running 50 reports a day, even that little amount of time is a world of difference for them. And we haven't peaked out on anything. Everybody has been extremely happy with the response times that they've gotten. Our databases, our DBA runs regular cleanup processes now that normally would have kind of bogged things down a little bit, but now she's able to do it any time of the day because it has the horsepower to do it, and it does it so seamlessly in the background that no one seems to even notice.
No, that's a great background. So I think it leads a good opportunity to talk about your SQL configuration. So talking SQL specifically, how is that configured in your environment? Obviously, we talked about it being virtualized, but for say high availability purposes, are these standalone instances relying on VMHA, or are they clustered instances, maybe with always on? Could you give us some background there?
We have a mix of both. We have a Citrix environment that's clustered. So the SQL, we have 2 SQL servers that are clustered HA for our Citrix environment, and the rest of them are pretty much standalone. We have anything from, excuse me, SQL Server 2000, we have 1 server left that we're trying to get out of, and all the way up to 2012. We haven't made the jump into 2015 and 16 yet, just because we want to vet everything out before we upgrade. We've got a mix and match of pretty much everything using Access front end. They have some of the pieces from legacies that are still using tie-ins that way. So redesigning newer infrastructures has become a little bit more of a process. But because of the fact that we have everything working the way that we do, it doesn't hinder us in our production environment right now.
Nope, thanks for that. That's good. That's good background. And since you mentioned performance, some of the benefits when moving the HCI is also having an opportunity to move to either a hybrid configuration that might include a certain amount of flash or solid state media, or maybe even an all flash configuration. So can you give us some background on that side of the equation?
We have a partial flash array. It stores all the most access data in the top tier, which would be the flash, and then moves it when it gets cold to the storage underneath it. It does it all seamlessly, as most things do nowadays. We don't have to go in and mark anything. Our hypervisors and Nutanix take care of all of that for us. We use the HA in some aspects from VMware to allow us to kind of balance other roles out, not necessarily SQL, but other workloads. And with all the SQL stuff running in the background, we have to have pretty much enough time almost of 24/7, because we have people working around the clock 7 days a week. And I haven't seen any major outages because of SQL. And the performance on it, like I said, we've got time back because of queries, the reads, the IOPS. Everything has just been phenomenal. It's doubled from what we had it originally. And as we tighten things down, look into more aspects of pieces, and go to different parts of the Nutanix environment, it's allowing us to gain more performance every little tweak that we make.
Yeah, and having that centralized data center, as you mentioned, really being the hub across all the remote offices and then people in the field, that uptime is very important, and something to really ease database layout. I know sometimes in other environments people might choose to put specific disks assigned to SQL on specific technologies, maybe ensure TempDB is located somewhere on faster spinning media or solid state drives, maybe ensuring that the logs are either writing to cache on a battery backed array or writing to solid state drives as well, and then trying to determine what data is hot and what could maybe be tiered down to more cost effective media, et cetera. So having a system that can automatically tier data in the most appropriate way is really important. But I've also run into SQL environments where everything is hot, where, given database workload could be hot, maybe not today, maybe not in a week, but it could be in a quarter, could be, end of a given business cycle, a given holiday season, et cetera. So, if you have some background, do you have an insight into what your database workload, especially in a tiered and hybrid system, where some of your data might not be accessed, it's really there for partial archiving, and maybe a subset of your queries are going to be the hottest to really lend themselves to a hybrid system. So does that sound like the way your environment works today? You're definitely going to have some cold data where it makes sense to tier that down to more cost-effective storage media, while ensuring that the most recent queries that are going to be hot based on the existing architecture are going to be within solid state. And another thing interesting specifically to Nutanix is the concept of data locality. So you talk about those performance benefits. One of the things that occurs within the system is a tiering policy not only between solid state drives and spinning media, but also a tiering policy across nodes with the preference of retrieving data local to the node where a given virtual machine is running. And that has several performance benefits, including local bus speed type access, not having to go to the top of rack switch. If you're not familiar with Hyperconverged, generally the interconnectivity between the nodes is 10 gigabit Ethernet. That's evolving into 25 gig, 40 gig, and beyond. But today, most of the time, this is 10 gigabit Ethernet. A lot of throughput, has a lot of bandwidth, works well in these architectures. But if we can choose not to have to go over that top of rack switch to retrieve data from other nodes, we prefer to do that. So when you start localizing data, it really maps to the same computer science terminology like NUMA or non-uniform memory access. So the concept of keeping your compute as close to the memory as possible. Nutanix took the next step and said we want to keep data as close to the processor as well from a storage perspective, based on the data locality. So I would not be surprised at all if a lot of the performance benefits that you've realized is a combination of SSD, but also the utilization of technologies like data locality and that targeted tiering.
Well, and Mike, another benefit we've had too, from the DR standpoint, we actually had a host fail not too long ago, a hardware issue, and it took us less, I think it was 22 minutes of downtime is what we took. And all that we had to do from the SQL aspect was let the connectors resync. Nothing had to be restarted. Data was still flowing. All the VMs came up. They just had to replay and get themselves in order. And like I said, 22 minutes is all we were down. And we had lost, when that host went out, we lost 2 business critical applications. So on that aspect too, when you go back from an ROI standpoint, 22 minutes of downtime on 2 business critical apps is big, but not as big as it could have been in the past.
Sure, absolutely. And another thing to consider when looking at these kinds of systems is if they're built to fail fast and also to rebuild automatically. So you talked about adding new drives to the system and that how that's seamless. It's going to automatically redistribute data to balance it across the system. But also when a node fails, specifically on Nutanix, we automatically rebuild across every node within the cluster because data is fully distributed across every node, across every drive. The replication and the way that data is maintained isn't tied to specific hardware constructs. It's really just software-defined replication across all the nodes and all the drives within the cluster. So if you do have a node fail, HA will obviously kick in and move resources to other nodes as required. We will automatically rebuild and essentially create a cluster of a smaller size, now with the same resiliency. So if you're going from an 8-node cluster to a 7-node cluster, for example, you will end up in the exact same resiliency, failures to tolerate, data protection level when you have a node failure, just with a smaller set of nodes going down from 8 to 7. So it's a really powerful option to say, you know, I'm going to need to do a drive replacement at some point. I'm going to need to do a server replacement at some point. But you are now resilient based on that distributed architecture and that automatic rebuild. So when you're ready to do that replacement, you would simply plug in that node, plug in that drive as a means of replacement, and then we would automatically expand out that system to the original size or to a larger size. And if you think about cloud architectures, and that's really where Nutanix was born. A lot of the core engineers came from Google as a part of the founding of Nutanix. So the model of using commodity hardware or common hardware with software-defined techniques at the virtualization layer and also at the storage layer, but also emulating what you would get out of the cloud. When you think about what Google does in their data centers, for example, if there's a failure, they're not rushing to replace a drive or rushing to replace a server. They have people that go down these long aisles looking for failed drives, looking for failed nodes. They unplug them, they plug the new one back in, because the system's auto-healing in the background when these failures occur, and then auto-expanding back out when you do this replacement or do this addition, whether it's a repair or an expansion of the underlying architecture. To really give you that same value, that same ease of use, taking that from not just being a cloud model, but allowing you to run that on-prem is really important. And it sounds like you've seen those benefits in your description of replacing a drive, and also description of being able to fail over, you know, when you have an outage in your environment. So that actually leads me to a question. What are the size of your Nutanix clusters? You mentioned half a rack or so, but what are the actual node counts that you have within them?
We have 7 node counts. 2 of them are a little configured differently for our SQL environment, a little more horsepower. And the other 5 are for our general workload and Citrix. The 2 Citrix servers have grid cards in, so we try to tie specific applications to those.
No, so that's a great. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say also, when you were talking about the hardware failures and things like that, excuse me, the Nutanix proactiveness is amazing. We get warnings every day. We have the alert set up to us. And whether they're false positives or not, we found out a power supply on one of the servers was going up and down because of a warning that we got from Nutanix. It didn't come from the hardware itself. It came from Nutanix telling us. And then we were able to go in through the actual browser and look at all the hosts and determine which host it was, which power supply, so that when we had to contact support, we had all that information. And it was streamlined. It was done. 4 hours, everything was fixed.
No, that's great. That also speaks to the goal of hyperconvergence of combining the insights across the various layers. You gave the example earlier on of maybe, don't want to say a junior DBA or someone with less experience, and maybe they were new to HCI as well. But the goal is to make that experience very simple and combine the visibility that you have in a consolidated platform across the virtual machines, across the hypervisor, across the underlying, firmware of the system, the nodes type, the drive types, and even the virtual machines themselves. Monitor across all these components, have alerting and events that will not only alert you, maybe do SNMP trapping and send it to whatever monitoring agent that you want, or we can do that ourselves with email alerts and whatnot. But also the concept of being able to dial home, and what we refer to as pulse data, which can, depending on the type of failure, automatically create tickets for you, and have dispatch occurred. So you mentioned support and working with support. What's been your experience so far with Nutanix support when you've called in?
It's one of the only supports that I call, and every time I call, I get a person. I don't wait on hold. I get forwarded to someone right away. They start, because of the fact that we didn't buy everything for Nutanix, we have 2 open tickets with Dell first. But I've been on the phone with support, for Nutanix support before, and Nutanix support was like, tell you what, we'll take care of the ticket with Dell so that we can get working on this for you and get it fixed. I've never had a Nutanix support person hang up on me or quit a call until the problem was fixed. In fact, we're still working with one because of a couple errors that we had, and he's been getting back to us once every couple of days, still, looking at this, trying to dissect this, and is very, very specific on what he's doing and how he's doing it and what his next step is. It's very thorough, and they sit with it. When we did the upgrade, they sat with us for, I want to say it was about 6.5, 7 hours. Half that time was just quiet time because we were waiting for things to upgrade, but they never left our side, ever. Never had to worry about it.
No, it's great to hear that directly. One of the things we take pride in is our Net Promoter Score, and our Net Promoter Score, just gives some people background. It's basically what peers, who have used a given organization or called in to support would rank that and would they recommend it, et cetera. It's a ranking system that can go from -100 all the way through to 100, and Nutanix has consistently been between 89 to 92, which I think is the highest in the industry. It's not uncommon for other solutions to be in the 30s or 40s or around that line. So we take pride in hiring engineers that are the first call that are already level 3 engineers. It's not a tiered support system. When you get to Nutanix support, you're really talking with one step before engineering at that point. So hopefully that's been your experience, and it sounds like it has been, and leads to much easier conversations and really great results when you do have to talk to support for whatever reason.
And both engineers, both actual field engineers that I've worked with, have been very knowledgeable. They're very good at getting back to us. They're very quick. I mean, when we had a problem with our licensing when we first implemented the Nutanix environment. Our field engineer went through and was trying to get it all squared away, and finally he's like, you know what? Everybody else is kind of dragging their heels a little bit on this on the other side of the coin. How about I just come and fix it for you? He scheduled an appointment, came out within an hour, he had it fixed. It's nice. After all the years in the industry and watching support go more and more to a point where you're going to be on hold, or you're lucky if you get an email back in a week, to personal attention, treating everybody as your #1 customer, is very awesome. Very awesome.
So you mentioned licensing. That made me think. Was there any? I know you joined Faith in the middle of that migration or at the early stages. Was there any planning around SQL licensing? You mentioned specific nodes that were a little beefier for SQL. A lot of times people look to have a higher clock speed on those processors, maybe a lower core count to help with licensing. So can you speak to that at all? Like maybe what they were coming from? Was there a consolidation effort to try to reduce licensing costs on the SQL side?
Well, there was a consolidation of, we had, I think it was 4 hosts running SQL boxes, and we wanted to ramp it down to 2, but didn't want to take any performance. The licensing itself, it changes regularly, so we didn't really worry about that as much as we wanted the performance. So we gauged it what we thought was going to be close to performance, and it's exceeded our expectations.
No, that's great to hear. So as a part of that architecture, did you consider, like when the nodes were procured, looking at the number of virtual CPU that you had assigned in the existing environment and mapping that to perhaps maybe the same count and faster core speeds, and maybe taking NUMA into account within those clusters, how much memory you want to present to each one, et cetera. Is there any, not to put you on the spot, is there any background that you can provide there into that consideration, or maybe that was before your time when those decisions were made?
That was before I got here. All I know is they did a lot of research into it before they decided what the final result was going to be. They had metrics from, I would say, if I remember correctly, they were running metrics for about 8 months, trying to determine exactly what was going to be needed. When I came in, it was already, this is exactly what we're going to get. Basically, that had all been decided.
Sure. And it's interesting because along those lines, I've heard the same. And when you're perhaps moving from a slower storage architecture to a configuration that does have solid state, or leveraging concepts like data locality, you're alleviating one bottleneck. So you're moving it away from perhaps a storage, and now you're applying it to maybe memory or the CPU of the configuration. So you want to make sure when you do that sizing, when you look at these kinds of migrations, that you do those due diligence. You look at the peak workloads. What's the peak time that a given workload is running? What's the most critical time of that workload, and try to cater for, what's my memory utilization at that point? What's my CPU utilization at that point? Does it allow us to consolidate? And when I do virtualize, whether you're doing virtual to virtual or physical to virtual, you want to keep in mind the configuration of that virtual machine to ensure it's aligned around non-uniform memory access boundaries. So you have a nice balanced config, an even number of processors to ensure that the memory access is local, to those given dies, to that given configuration. So it sounds like you guys put a lot of that, a lot of those considerations in ahead of time, and it led to some really good business results. So is there anything in general that that you would recommend to folks that are, maybe looking to do this journey, have SQL, maybe other applications, other databases, and are due for a refresh, like Faith was due for, those 3-year leases, and any best practices or recommendations you could give?
One, do your homework. Make sure you know exactly what you need. And don't be afraid to spec a little heavy. The benefits far outweigh the drawbacks. 2, use your support. They're amazing, they're knowledgeable, and they won't leave you empty-handed. And 3, make sure you plan it out. Have a good plan in place. We could have had a little better plan when it came to the migration, but it was kind of, we've got a month and a half to do this. So basically plan everything out, use your support, and get all your information and your numbers ahead of time.
And one of the things we're doing at Nutanix to help with that process, especially with kind of the homework and understanding existing workloads and planning for best practices, and what do you want the environment to look like when you migrate, and what's the best practice of that target environment, is we have a new tool we launched called SQL Server Mobility Services. And what this tool does is allows you to scan your existing SQL environment, essentially discovering, you point it towards an instance of SQL, you give it the required credentials to communicate with SQL completely agentless, and it discovers resources that it's consuming, the database configuration and layout, the memory utilization, CPU utilization, et cetera. So it's a great way to scan existing environments, get an understanding of what's there, and we can actually use that to help size a target environment. We can upload that to our sizer tool and give you a good output of what we would want that target configuration to be based on what we just scanned and what we just discovered. We take that the next step and actually create a best practice blueprint for you. So what we would want the target, kind of going up the stack, what we want the target virtual machine to look like, what best practices we would want applied, both at the Nutanix level, the operating system level, as well as the SQL level. You could take that and build your own environment, or we can take the next step, which the tool does, which is actually to deploy that target environment for you. So imagine scanning an existing environment. It could be bare metal physical servers. It could be an existing virtualized environment. It would automatically instantiate that best practice config on that Nutanix environment for you, create the virtual machine, install SQL, apply the best practices, and get the environment ready for moving a database over. And then as a last step, we can actually automate the migration of the database as well. So we do a form of log shipping. We can leverage your existing backups that are already within that instance. We can query the MSDB and understand, do you have a backup that we can leverage? We'll take that backup and instantiate it on that newly formed best practice environment, and then we'll take any log backups and apply them as well. So really that log shipping type of functionality that a lot of SQL DBAs are familiar with. Once you're ready to cut over, you could do a test cut over and bring that VM online. Maybe you're doing a POC and you want to test out what the database would look like when it's migrated over, or you can simply cut over and do a full migration. We'd put the existing SQL instance in the single user mode, apply the last log backup, bring it online, and now you have a fully migrated environment ready for users or applications to be directed towards to complete the migration. So we really want that process to be as simple and seamless as possible. A lot of that is, as Ben was saying, is doing your homework and being prepared and being ready, and hopefully, this tool will help people do that and also help with automating the cutover itself. So unfortunately, that tool wasn't quite available when you guys started your journey, Ben. But if you look at anything in the future, hopefully it's something that you can leverage, and maybe even today, just to understand what resources are consumed and what's going on. It's a pretty cool tool. All right. So with that, Ben, it's been great speaking with you. Any last words? Any other words of advice?
I'm glad that my induction into HCI was done with Nutanix, because some of the other ones that I've seen since, much more cumbersome process, much more complicated process.
Oh, that's good to hear. Yep, and really ultimately, changing infrastructure shouldn't be just for the sake of changing it. It should be because there's a drastic benefit, whether it's collapsing the infrastructure, ease of use, allowing administrators to do multiple things, not just being a storage admin or virtualization admin or a server admin, but really being able to easily do all of those roles, and even maybe start to elevate looking at more of the applications, understanding SQL at a deeper level, or maybe even the applications that run the business at the end of the day. So running HCI and running on Nutanix has given you the ability to do that. That to us is a huge win. I'm looking at any questions that might have come in from our audience. I don't see anything right now. I mean, does anyone out there have any questions that they'd like to throw in the chat? We have a few minutes left. If there's anything pressing that you'd like to understand, anything that we can clarify, or just any general SQL questions that we could help to cover.
Mike, I'm not seeing anything right now.
Yeah, no, neither do I. So Rob, you know what? I'll throw it back to you and for any closing words.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ben and Mike, for giving the presentation today. The session is recorded, so I'm going to post it on our data architecture chapter site, the YouTube site, and put a link in there. And I just wanted to tell everybody thank you for coming, and I look forward to the next meeting. Ben and Mike, thanks again.